everyone, welcome to the May 18th edition of the TimeformUS Pacecast. I'm David Aragona, and I'll be joined in just a moment by my regular co-host, Craig Milkowski. This week on the podcast, we're recapping last weekend's racing, which was topped by the Grade 1 Preakness, the second jewel of the Triple Crown, and it was an upset as Rombauer got the job done. One of the horses who was considered a new shooter in the race, having skipped the Kentucky Derby, he beat the horse that crossed the wire first in the Kentucky Derby Midnight Spirit, as well as that wise guy horse Midnight Bourbon, who was second. And Rombauer put in a really big effort, and it sets it up for an interesting Belmont Stakes in 3 weeks. Craig and I will talk about all of that, look ahead to the race, and recap the Preakness. There were also plenty of other stakes races to talk about from Saturday and Friday's Black-Eyed Susan card at Pimlico, so we'll go through a bunch of those undercard stakes, some nice performances there. Then we'll move on to some other racetracks. There was the Louisville mile-and-a-half race on the turf at Churchill Downs. We'll talk about that, as well as some races from Belmont, including some impressive performances from the 2-year-olds, which have just gotten started in New York. And then we'll finish things up at Santa Anita, where there was a 3-year-old sprinting performance that was notable. But Craig, the focus was on Pimlico, where the Preakness did result in that upset by Rombauer. A really good story all around, as the connections who bred this horse, they were saying on TV that they would have sold him if not for the pandemic, but ended up in their barn, and Mike McCarthy prepared him well for this race, got the job done.
Yeah, Mike McCarthy, he's become a really underrated trainer, I think, and he's done a great job with Rombauer. He got a nice 122 TimeformUS speed figure, which is obviously a career best for him. And what is interesting for me is he's a horse who's improved his speed figure every single time out, and this was his 7th career start. And that's something you want to see with 3-year-olds. He's moving in the right direction. So, it was a surprise. I'm not going to pretend this horse I didn't pick him certainly at 11-1, but he'd been progressing nicely all along. I think his Bluegrass was a bit underrated, and he was able to show more early speed than he ever had before, and he just kept moving in the right direction. I'm the last guy to try to guess if a horse can handle the 1.5 miles of the Belmont, but he certainly looked like extra distance wouldn't be any problem.
Yeah, I have to say, like you, I was a little surprised because he had never run one of those speed figures before that suggested he was in that upper echelon of 3-year-olds. But when I was handicapping the race, I did go back and watch his Bluegrass, and what you say is correct. He really leveled off well at the end of that race, like he was finishing best of all. It just felt like he was running when the race was over, so I kind of disregarded it. I don't mean that it is a kind of red board. His Bluegrass was a good effort, but it still was a cut below some of the other 3-year-olds that had competed in the Kentucky Derby. But he took a big step forward here. And while there are some red color-coded pace figures in the TimeformUS PPs, I don't think this was a race that fell apart by any means. Rombauer was really the only horse that made a run from off the pace, and it was a field that was pretty tightly packed moving down the backstretch. Even though you got those red color-coded fractions, the entire field was covered by about 7 lengths on the backstretch, so it was not like some strung-out group of 3-year-olds, and Rombauer just finished up like he was a fresh horse at the top of the stretch, whereas the others were kind of staggering into the wire. I thought Midnight Bourbon and Medina Spirit, they actually both ran their races. They just weren't quite good enough on the day.
Yeah, and I think the pace was really solid. I don't have any problem with the red fractions, but it's not a race that you say completely fell apart. Now, I will be the first to say that I wasn't that impressed with the horses coming into this race, so I'm not really surprised. Keep me in mind. We know what he is by now. He did his usual clunk up for, so I'm not sure who else was going to do any running late in here, so maybe that's a little bit overstated. The disappointment in this race had to be Concert Tour. I know we talked about him on the forecast, and neither one of us is surprised, but I'm surprised at how little running he did. I saw some people complaining that Mike Smith didn't get him out and didn't hustle for the lead, but I think he did, and he just had no horse. This horse showed me absolutely nothing and was disappointing. I'm not sure what the answer is for him. Maybe a cut back to 1 turn. Hopefully it's not too late, because he just looked like a sour horse that didn't want to run.
Yeah, I think those are both good points to make. Concert Tour, from a handicapping standpoint, was just not a horse that I thought was ever going to be competitive in this race because he just didn't look like a classic distance horse. We got that proven to us in the Arkansas Derby, and Bob Baffert had been saying ever since the Arkansas Derby that he's running the horse because the owners wanted to run. He basically tried to spell it out for us. And also, if you... I saw a lot of people beforehand, and afterwards questioning the ride of Mike Smith. And I was kind of joking with you a little bit about on Twitter, kind of tongue in cheek. If you were somebody who thought that Mike Smith was going to go on some suicide mission to beat Medina Spirit, I got a bridge to sell you. That just was never going to happen. So he was not competitive in this race. As for the others, I just don't have a whole lot to say about the also-rans. Keep me in mind, he was trying to close from the back of the pack, but at the end of the day, while he did pass a few horses, he never really got close. And really, Medina Spirit and Midnight Bourbon, while I guess they were somewhat disappointing here, they still ran speed figures that were comparable to their prior best efforts, so I thought they ran well enough. Rombauer just took a big step forward and was so much better on the day, and the way that he finished this race, I think you have to be pretty optimistic about Rombauer's chances moving on to the Belmont Stakes. And personally, for me, as somebody who is a big fan of the New York racing and loves the Belmont Stakes, I would say the Belmont is probably my favorite Grade 1 race all year. I'm looking forward to what's setting up to be a really competitive Belmont Stakes this year.
Yeah, it should be fun, and the Belmont card's always going to be awesome. Now, we did have the news a little disappointing from a betting perspective, or from a fan perspective, that Bob Baffert's not able to run in New York currently on the NYRA circuit at least, so we won't get to see horses like Charlatan and Gamine. But it's still going to be a fabulous card. For me, Belmont Day is basically the second best day of racing in the year, behind only Breeders' Cup Saturday. So really looking forward to the Belmont, and the Belmont Stakes is going to be fabulous, I think.
Yeah, and while, that Bob Baffert news, it might take a couple of stars out of those races, you could argue that maybe those horses not running will make those races they would have run a little more competitive. So from a wagering standpoint, maybe it's not the worst thing in the world that we're going to have not have those Bob Baffert runners. It is what it is with New York banning Bob Baffert. We're not going to get into that right now, but I think it's just something from a standpoint of restoring trust in the game. It's something that does make sense to do at this point in time. And hopefully Bob Baffert makes the most of this little timeout that he's been given. Well, let's move on to some of the other grade stakes racing action that took place at Pimlico last week. And beginning with some of those undercard stakes from Saturday, the dinner party was run right before the Preakness, and it was won by the venerable New York bred Some Like It Hot Brown, a horse that really shows up almost every time except when he gets involved in some quick paces that he can't deal with. That wasn't really the case here because he got a good stalking trip this time, got the jump on some other horses when he took over from that long shot leader, Flying Scotsman, but he was able to hold off all the closers pretty gamely.
Yeah, this was a good effort from him. I thought coming in, he was clearly the classiest horse in the race, had done the most. I know Sacred Life got bet harder and had some better speed figures, but Some Like It Brown had run really well in some top races. But I have reservations. He was a horse who looked like he mostly liked to go wire to wire, but maybe that was a little bit lazy on my part, because when you look back in his past, he had come from off the pace a couple of times, once slightly, and once when he broke his maiden from pretty far back. So he's a little more versatile than I gave him credit for, and this was just a really great ride from Jose Ortiz, who just let the speed horse go, and Flying Scotsman kind of tracked him. The pace wasn't overly quick at all. It was a little bit on the slow side early, and he was just able to take over when asked and win pretty easily. So he got a nice 121 TimeformUS speed figure, which is about what he can run. He's been able to run better in the past, and maybe a faster pace would allow that, but just really solid effort from him, and looks like he's back in top form as a 5-year-old.
Yeah, he's just a really cool horse. He runs well at distances ranging from a mile out to a mile and an eighth. He's got that really versatile running style where he can be on the lead or just off it, and we did see him use those stalking tactics in this race. And like you were saying, when he runs his best race, he was just better than these horses, and we didn't get to see his best race because of pace situations in his last couple of starts, the Fort Lauderdale and the Maker's Mark, but he was able to get back on track here. So I would imagine the Connections have a lot of options with him moving forward, especially with him being a New York bred. There will be many races for him on the NYRA circuit if they decide to go that route. I guess the big disappointment in this race was Sacred Life, who was bet down to be the 6-5 favorite. Briefly looked like he was going to be a threat in mid-stretch, but he just didn't really go on with it in the final eighth of a mile, trying to close out wide. And he actually got passed from behind in the late stages for second by Midnight Tea Time, who got up for third here. Talker Listen crossed the wire second here. So some long shots in behind Some Like It Hot Brown, but the winner clearly around the best race. Moving on to the Grade 3 Maryland Sprint. This one of a few 6-furlong graded stakes races we saw this past week, or I should say stakes races, not graded, that we saw this past weekend at Pimlico. This one, for the older horses, was won by Special Reserve. And Craig, I've got to say, we pretty much missed this all around on the TimeformUS forecast last week, as the two horses that we liked the least, Special Reserve and Strike Power, completed the exacta here. This was, though, a race that was greatly affected by the fact that the pace just never really heated up on the front end.
Yeah, it didn't at all, and day late and a dollar short for me with Special Reserve. I jumped off the bandwagon too quick, I guess, because he ran pretty good last time, and seemed like the cutback to 6 furlongs really helped. It certainly helped the speed figure as he jumped to a 121, which is as good as we've seen most of the older horse stakes run this year. So maybe he's going to be a player. He was able to rate off a Strike Power. He's been more of a speed horse. I mean, he was right there next to him, not like he really rated, but just a really good effort from him. Strike Power ran fine, and not much from anybody else.
Yeah, a lot of those local Maryland horses that typically run speed figures that make them competitive in these races, they just weren't able to deliver on this day, as the out-of-town shippers really dominated this race, even with Frosted Grace getting up for third here. Though he was never a threat to the top two, especially not to Special Reserve, who took over at the top of the stretch pretty powerfully. Looked like he might actually win by more than a couple lengths at mid-stretch, but Strike Power battled on for second. And they arguably did run the best two races, though I do think the trips helped these horses who in the past have been negatively affected by some horses going after them on the front end. That just didn't happen here. So Special Reserve was able to run one of his best speed figures of his career. We'll see if he ultimately turns out to be good enough to be competitive in some of those top tier sprint races. A number like 121 would put him in the mix, but he might have to deal with some more speed in those races in the future. Moving on to another sprint race on that Saturday card at Pimlico, though this one was on the turf. That is the 5-furlong Jim McKay Turf Sprint, and it was a bit of an upset as Firecrow got the job done over the favorite, the Critical Way. Once again, a race that was totally dominated on the front end, but these might have just been the two fastest horses in the race anyway.
Yeah, we had kind of warned it. It's no matter how much speed signed on these 5-furlong races, speed is still a weapon, and you got to use it. And Firecrow took the best advantage. Great ride by Joel Rosario. I wasn't sure what to expect. I had mentioned it, but he wasn't afraid to use this horse's speed. And yeah, horse hadn't been on turf for a while, but he had run pretty good on it as I believe as a 3-year-old was the last time we saw him. But he stepped up and ran big here, got a 120 TimeformUS speed figure, and he's a horse I would say, based on this effort, it's probably better served staying on the green stuff because his dirt races have been okay, but nothing like this.
Yeah, I thought it was a really excellent ride from Joel Rosario, who did what he had to do in the opening quarter mile, which is the most important part of these turf sprints. He hustled this horse to get him into a forward position, and then he dropped his hands once he got into that second place position behind the Critical Way moving into the far turn, let the horse relax into a rhythm coming around the far turn, and he waited until the Critical Way came off the bridle in the stretch. Then he asked this horse to go, and he was able to get that final extra burst that Joel Rosario just always seems to get out of these horses in these turf sprints, and he was able to get up for the victory. I will say the horse that might have been best in this race, though, was the third place finisher, Completed Pass, who did really blow the start. He broke clearly last in the 13-horse field, and that's just really tough to overcome, especially in a 5-furlong turf sprint, and his rider, Angel Cruz, got after him on the backstretch to rush up and get as close as he could to the leaders by the time they broke for the far turn, and he did get up into third place, passing 10 horses on the backstretch, but still, that just took too much out of him for him to make that late thrust in the stretch. He might have been best, but he had to settle for third here.
Yeah, it was a really good run by him because on top of having to rush up, I mean, because of that, he got caught really wide around the turn, which is something you don't really want to see at 5 furlongs. So good effort from him, and he's certainly going to be a force. I mean, he's back in top form as we had talked about on the forecast. He's just a really tough turf sprinter at the age of 7, and he kind of sticks to the Maryland circuit. But I'd like to see him branch out a little bit because he's definitely got some run in him and could give anybody a run for their money at this distance.
By the way, I just want to backtrack a little bit. Speaking of excellent rides in these races, I think we were remiss not to mention, maybe you did and I didn't hear it, not to mention the ride that Flavien Prat gave Rombauer in the Preakness. And I just want to mention, I've been so impressed by Flavien Prat as a rider over these past couple of big days, Churchill Downs Derby Day and Preakness Day. He's riding out in California. We think about a lot of the top riders in the country being concentrated in New York or at Keeneland when they go there. But Flavien Prat, to me, is as good as the Rosarios and the...
Yeah, that's a good point. He's been fabulous. We've seen it on the biggest stage the last couple of weeks. He's as good as anybody out there. I would never. I would always be excited to see him on any horse I wanted to back, regardless of surface.
Move on to some other races that took place on that Preakness undercard at Pimlico Saturday. Another graded stakes. I think the last of the graded stakes we're going to talk about from that Saturday card was the Gallarette, going 1 mile and a 16th on the turf for the fillies and mares. And this one, I know, Craig, was one that frustrated you a little bit just because of the lack of aggression shown by a lot of riders. And I mean, Mean Mary did look like the lone speed coming into the race, and they kind of did concede the race to her on the front end, as it does happen quite often with these top-level turf races in the country. She ran her race, I suppose, off the layoff. She'll move forward from here, but the others didn't necessarily give themselves their best chance.
Yeah, do we have to talk about this one? No, just kidding. Yeah, obviously all of our fractions are going to be coated in blue. It was just a ridiculous pace on the front end. I know she was lone speed, but I just don't know what these other guys are thinking. I mean, a horse like Great Island, who was in last early, had a pace figure of 26 after an opening quarter mile. So I just don't know what to even make of this race. When I handicap, I'm going to put a line through it other than to say, okay, Mean Mary came back, and I guess she can still run. She's going to get a 112 TimeformUS pace or speed figure, and I'll be the first to admit it's just kind of a shot in the dark. I kind of played around with the numbers in here. It was the best I could do because this was one that just threw the algorithm we use into a complete tizzy. The numbers made no sense. So that's how all I can say is I would recommend handicappers kind of ignore this race from a speed figure perspective. I did think Vigilante's Way ran well given the circumstances. I know you pointed out a little bit of a tough trip. I still would have liked to seen a little more aggression from Jose Ortiz as opposed to being last, turning for home. But, I thought that one probably ran as good as the winner.
Yeah, I mean, when I was watching the race, especially when you see the head-on, once she bobbled and was really knocked sideways coming out of the gate, I thought there was no opportunity for Jose to send. You could see on the head-on when that happens, there's already a horse crossing over in front of her. So it just didn't seem like there was ever an opportunity for him to get into position. I don't know if the plan ever was to send this horse. Maybe the plan was always to rate, but given the way that she broke, I thought that Jose made the best of the situation. And Vigilante's Way actually ran really well in here. He saved ground every step of the way. And when they got into the stretch, she produced the best late kick of all. And the TimeformUS speed figures reflect that, with her getting the top number of 118, getting the biggest pace bonus based on the slow pace situation out of anybody in this race. And I mean, the one thing that I have to say about Mean Mary, the winner of this race, is, I mean, the tactics that they used, it arguably put her win in her likely win in the greatest jeopardy, because they basically turned this race into a 1/4 mile sprint. And Mean Mary is not a horse who's known for her speed. She's more of a long-distance turf horse, 1 mile and a 16th. If anything, it's a distance that in the past has been a little bit too short for her. So why would you want to make her prove that she's a faster 1/4 mile sprinter than everybody else? And I mean, you could see at the end that Vigilante's Way actually had a better turn of foot than she did. She was closing on her at the wire. Mean Mary's class was able to just win out. But I mean, on a heavy favorite, I want to see these guys open up a little bit and not make these horses have to run so fast at the end. Show the horse's superiority.
Yeah, the one thing you pointed out, I guess it won't matter much, is ultimately she's a horse that's probably going to be pointed to much longer distances, 1 mile and 3/8, 1.5 miles. So this is just a prep. But you make a really good point. The pace didn't do her any favors. We talk about it a lot. It's one thing to set a clear, uncontested lead, but it's another to do it where basically nobody's ever running, and you keep the closers in the race and give up your weapon. And it almost cost her in the end. Not that it ever really looked like she was going to get run down, but definitely Vigilante's Way was making up some real ground on her.
Staying on the turf, another stakes event that took place on Saturday at Pimlico was the James W. Murphy for the 3-year-olds, going 1 mile. This one was won by another heavy favorite, the Brad Cox-trained TD Dance. I don't have a whole lot to say about this race. This horse did produce an impressive kick at the very end, but this did not look like a strong field coming in.
Yeah, that's it. He ran a pretty good speed figure for a 3-year-old May. He got a 113. He kind of backed up what he showed last time, where he was able to close into a pace that really slowed down in the middle and draw away. And yeah, I don't have too much to add other than the speed figure was good, and he looks like a pretty promising 3-year-old. That division's always pretty open this time of year, particularly given what we've seen from like the races at Keeneland, where the Breeders' Cup winner didn't particularly run very well. So he's certainly one to keep an eye on.
Yeah, this is one where I wonder if it might be worth timing this race from video. I don't know if you did that. The final quarter mile seems a little bit hard for me to believe. I mean, everybody's getting that big pace bonus. Everyone in the field, even those that were fading at the end, are running a faster or improving their TimeformUS pace figure from the middle call to the final call. The winner came home so fast, it's almost hard to believe. And that big bump up is reflected in the TimeformUS speed figure of 113, which seems kind of high for this horse. I just wonder, I didn't see this race. It didn't seem like they were coming home that fast, but the winner did produce a pretty impressive late kick, so I guess you never know.
Yeah, I'll have to check it out. I didn't time it. There's generally not problems at Pimlico. They do have GMAX in place, but they still use the beam the time races. But with the rail at 0, I'll give it a look later today, see what I can find.
Another stakes race for the sprinters on Saturday at Pimlico was the Ski Pat for the fillies and mares, going 6 furlongs on the dirt, and Chub Wagon was able to keep her undefeated record intact. She is now 6 for 6 in her career. This horse who began things at Parks, she just keeps stepping up in class and continues to deliver, though I wouldn't say that she even had to produce her best effort here to get the job done, as she just got the jump on a couple of horses who really do need pace in their favor, and those that were second and third here, and they didn't get enough.
No, it was a race where Don't Let Sweet Fool You broke out to an early lead, was able to outrun the other speed in here, and she really slowed it down after a fairly quick opening quarter. I mean, nothing too overly taxing. She really slowed it down to the half, and I think that took the closers and Casual and Club Car kind of out of the game, and it just let Chubwagon be able to run by her lead. Watching the race, it was really visually impressive. She did at least show that she doesn't have to be in the front. She had never been headed before. She was able to comfortably sit back in third, so that's a good thing. But she did only get a 106 TimeformUS speed figure, which is below what she'd run the last two. But she seems to be a dangerous filly sprinter, especially now that she showed this new tactic that she can sit just off the lead.
Yeah, I mean, I guess at this point now, they really do have to move her up into a graded stakes company because she's earned that opportunity. I'm interested to see how good she turns out to be. She, like you said, she's not running speed figures that suggest that she's among the best filly and mare sprinters out there, but she is getting the job done, and she's doing it in pretty impressive fashion. I mean, she only won this race by a couple of lengths, but the result really never looked in doubt. I will say the runner-up Casual, I still think that she's got a big performance in her. It's just that she hasn't gotten enough pace in her last couple of starts, and maybe it's a negative that it seems like she's lost all of the tactical speed that she once had. I mean, she really has turned into one of these one-run closing sprinters, and that's always tough to get the right pace scenario. But she did come with a pretty impressive late run here, a much faster final quarter than anybody else. So if she finds the right kind of pace situation next time, she could be dangerous, but she really is dependent on how quickly they go up front.
Yeah, for sure. And Chubwagon's a tough kind of horse for bettors, and that she's just winning and winning easily. Nobody's ever been close to her at the wire, but she's not running that fast. So I hope they do jump her up, as you say, just to really see what we have in her.
Final stakes race we'll talk about from the Saturday card was the Grade 3 Chick-Lang, going 6 furlongs, same distance as the Ski Pat, this one though for the 3-year-old males, and once again, a race that didn't feature the most competitive pace scenario, as Mighty Mischief was able to assert his supremacy early and really never took a serious challenge down the lane.
No, this was a case where I think they bet the wrong Steve Asmussen runner. Mighty Mischief had better speed figures, better early speed than Jackson Traveler, and it kind of played out on the track. It doesn't always work out that way, but it did here, and just a really solid effort from him. He ran a 108 Timeform US speed figure, which is pretty much in line with the efforts he's been running, and good effort. Not a whole lot to add. I mean, it's not one that I think is going to be having the connections think he's a future Breeders' Cup runner, but it is still pretty early in the 3-year-old season.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, sometimes we see some of these Preakness Day Stakes winners come back in the stakes on Belmont Day. I think a little bit less than we used to in past years, but I feel like there are much better 3-year-old sprinters pointing to a race like the Woody Stevens than Mighty Mischief, who's running just some slower speed figures. So we'll see. He's very lightly raced. He's only run, I believe, 4 times now, and he's won 3 in a row. So there's clearly upside here. Just think that there are some better horses out there in this division. Moving on to Friday's card at Pimlico, that was Black-Eyed Susan Day, and let's start the conversation of Friday by talking about that race, the Black-Eyed Susan for the 3-year-old fillies going 1 1/8, and Army Wife, a horse that was coming off a bit of a troubled trip in the Gazelle behind search results, getting steadied at the top of the stretch that day before coming on for third. She rebounded in a big way here to get the victory under a very savvy ride from Joel Rosario.
Yeah, this was a race that I actually loved Army Wife in here, but somehow I managed to get myself shut out because I had flipped the NBC to get a better view because I didn't like the feed on the other channel and there was a bit of lag. But anyway, I don't want to dwell too much on that. It was a really nice run from Army Wife. She wound up winning pretty easily. She got a great trip from Joel Rosario, sat on the rail the whole way along. He didn't give it up even when things got a little bit tight. Tipped out, and I do think we need to talk about the rail on this Friday because it definitely seemed like a pretty distinct advantage to me, and Army Wife took full advantage of it. The favorite in here was the Bob Baffert Beautiful Gift, who I would say you could say was the complete opposite. I know neither one of us probably would have liked her anyway, having been one of those California fillies who we've been talking about all year, just was a pretty weak division out there. But she's one who had no chance given her post and the trip she got. And just hats off to Joel Rosario because he rode it perfectly.
Yeah, the rail was a significant advantage at Pimlico on Friday. If you watch all the dirt races, I mean, you could just see horses getting reinvigorated by racing on the rail. If there were multiple horses in contention at the top of the stretch and ones had been racing outside and others had been on the rail, it just seemed like the rail runners would spurt away through the final quarter mile in the lane. And that's exactly what happened in this Black-Eyed Susan. Looked like it was a competitive race coming around the far turn as the entire field fanned out, but you actually had 3 horses finishing 10 lengths ahead of the rest, and those were the 3 horses who rode the rail the entire way. Army Wife, Willful Woman, and Lady Traveler all rode the rail until they got to the quarter pole, a couple ankled out at that point. But one horse who really never had to leave the rail was Army Wife, Joel Rosario, with that really savvy move on the backstretch to take advantage of the riders leaving the rail open to come up the inside, secure that position, got in a bit of a tight spot at the half-mile pole, but he didn't get afraid. Joel Rosario is as cool a customer as there is on a horse. He was able to get her to relax in behind runners coming around that second bend, and she was able to spurt away in the lane. I don't have a whole lot to say about the others that finished farther behind. Forever Boss, who was 4th, maybe on a fair track she would have been much closer because she did launch a wide run from far back and was extremely wide coming around the far turn. It looked like she was about to go back onto the highway that runs around the track. But in the end of the day, she still lost this race by about 14 lengths. So bias or not, I'm not sure how close she would have gotten even on a fair track. Army Wife's a nice horse. I just think we have to see her duplicated again on a racetrack that's not as heavily tilted towards the rail as this one.
Yeah, and I should mention she got a 107 speed figure from us, which is decent, but it's not going to scare any true Grade 1 fillies at this time of year. And we do have the day coded in red. Bright red is being speed favoring, and I think that was largely a case of the rail. It just turned out that a lot of the horses that took advantage were the leaders, but as we saw with Army Wife, you could sit off the pace, and as long as you stayed inside, you were going to have an advantage.
Yeah, if you're doubting the rail bias at all, we're not going to talk about the race, but just go back and watch the Miss Preakness from Friday, where Red Ghost, who won the race, looked like she was finished at the top of the stretch. A couple of horses that were racing out in the center of the track put her away by about 2 or 3 lengths, but her rider kept her right on the rail all through the stretch, and she somehow, despite looking tired and finished at the quarter pole, came back and won the race, and that's what you see on a rail bias track. Even horses that, should be losing these races are getting up to win just because the track carries them there. Moving on to another stakes race that was influenced by the racetrack on Friday. That was the Grade 3 Pimlico Special run right before the Black-Eyed Susan. And no surprise, wire-to-wire winner, rode the rail or the two-path much of the way. That was Last Judgment, who was able to beat a couple of horses, Modernist and Fearless, who are nice runners. One of them, though, was probably the best horse in the race.
Yeah, this was one I didn't get shut out and was able to take full advantage of the rail bias because I loved 11 and 1. I thought they were both going to be on the rail the whole way around, and it pretty much worked out that way. And I'm going to assume the horse you're talking about is Fearless, who was just basically wide the entire time, ran really well. The winner, Last Judgment, got a 123 TimeformUS speed figure. The 2-3 finishers got 120s. But for me, it would be hard to argue that Fearless wasn't the best horse in here. And I still think he's got a lot of upside, and this is only going to help with bettors inflate his value going forward. Of course, it depends on the field he draws, but I just have a hunch he's got a big one in him somewhere.
Yeah, he seems like the kind of horse that maybe Pletcher could take to a race like the Stephen Foster, Fearless, because it's now twice in a row that I think Fearless has been the best horse and hasn't crossed the wire first, both in the Oaklawn handicap when it seemed like maybe he overcommitted to the rail and didn't quite get through until it was too late, and now this race, the Pimlico Special, where he was against the track the entire way, like you said, and this was a race that was dominated by horses that rode the rail. Not just the top 2 finishers, but even those that finished right behind Fearless. Cordmaker and Prioritize, they both spent a significant portion of their trips on the rail, and they were 4 out of the top 5 finishers in this race that got that kind of trip, and Fearless was the only one that bucked the trend who was able to finish in a top placing. So the fact that he still ran a 120 TimeformUS speed figure with that kind of trip, I think speaks to the kind of form that he's in right now. And not to take anything away from Last Judgment, he's a talented horse, and he's also in excellent form at the moment. He might have just been carried along by the racetrack this day. Moving on to the Allaire DuPont Distaff, kind of a female counterpart to the Pimlico Special. This one, though, just going 1 mile and a 16th, Grade 3 event. And Spice is Nice. She was able to win this race for Todd Pletcher. Didn't get the job done in the Pimlico Special, but was able to get the money here with this pretty talented 4-year-old filly. She, while she was 4th place throughout, actually was never on the rail. So I thought this was a legitimate performance.
Yeah, I thought she ran really well. I know we had talked about her race at Keeneland last time on the Pacecast. We both really liked it a lot. And frankly, I was surprised she wasn't favored in here. I know Horologist has a little bit better resume when you look at the races she's been competing in, but her last 2 have not been very impressive from a speed figure perspective. So I thought Spice is Nice was the horse to beat, and she ran like it. Another good effort from her, and she got a 115 TimeformUS speed figure, and she's one that I think is going to appreciate more distance if she can ever get it than what she got here. I know there's not a lot of opportunities, but she looks like she can run all day to me.
Yeah, and I misspoke. This race was 1 mile and an 1/8, not 1 mile and a 16th, which is right up Spice's Nice's alley. But like you were saying, I think a race like the Delaware Handicap would be perfect for her. I think that's really the only 1.25 mile race for the fillies and mares that's a graded stakes that's left out there on the dirt, but she seems like she's a perfect fit for that kind of race. She's in good form right now, and both of her races now as a 4-year-old, both her allowance win at Keeneland and this one, suggest that she's really taken a step forward off of her 3-year-old form. So it appears like Todd Pletcher has got a good filling in his barn. We'll see if she's ultimately good enough to win the Grade 1 races, because this is a relatively strong division. Staying at Pimlico, just one more stakes race to discuss, and then we'll also talk about an allowance race earlier on this card. That stakes was the Hilltop for the 3-year-old fillies. Don't have a whole lot to say about this one, Craig. I just put it on the list because it was an exciting race to watch as Alda got the job done. This is one of the turf races that we saw that featured quite a bit of pace, and it fell apart at the end, but credit to Alda because she actually made the first run and was still able to hold on.
Yeah, it was a good effort from her. A lifetime best 106 Timeform US speed figure. She was one of those who had run in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Filly Turf. Didn't run particularly well behind Dan Pearl that day. Didn't run very well behind Toby's Heart in her comeback race at just 5.5. But stretching back out seemed to be the deal. She got the pace that she was looking for, and good effort. Not an overly strong race, but it was a fun race to watch.
Yeah, I thought she ran well, and I thought it was nice to see Seasons come back with a big performance. She was second in here, and she was a horse when she was a 2-year-old last year that was kind of the talk as one of the best turf fillies of the summer at Saratoga among the juveniles, and she won her debut in kind of desperate fashion, disappointed a bit in the Tama next time, but she made her 3-year-old debut here with a good effort. She, of course, is the daughter of that excellent female turfer from a number of years ago, Winter Memories, so interesting to see if she's got more potential to move forward in the future, but I thought both of these two ran fine for a listed turf stakes race. The final race we'll talk about from Pimlico on Friday was an allowance race early in the day, and wonder where Craig is, something that I don't know if Craig has ever heard somebody say to him, but he won the allowance race early in the card, race 3, or I think race 6 maybe, a 6-furlong race, fast speed figure, but again, another one of these races that was affected by the racetrack.
Yeah, he got a 118 Timeform US speed figure for the win. It was a good, solid effort. He was a horse who had showed plenty of promise as a 3-year-old. He had a close second in the Gold Fever at Belmont, attended the pace in the Amsterdam at Saratoga for backing up behind Yapone, who was a really fast horse. So he's one that certainly got some potential. I just don't know how you rate this horse. I mean, the 118 is what it is, but the racetrack probably carried him a little bit. Now, the way our speed figures work, it tends not to really overrate horses that run on the bias, other than, it's hard to explain, but he's in good form. It's going to knock the horses behind him more than it's going to elevate him. But, can he reproduce it on a fair track? I guess we'll see.
Let's move on to some other venues, beginning with Churchill Downs, where on Saturday they ran a pretty large field of horses into the starting gate to go 1.5 miles in the Grade 3 Louisville. I think 14 runners were signed on for this race, though there was a clear class standout among them, and that was the heavy favorite Arklow, who did deliver in his 7-year-old debut, getting the job done over a cavalry charge in behind him.
Yeah, I feel like we've seen this story about 7 or 8 times. It just Arklow beat Red Knight. I mean, it seems to happen pretty regularly. The Arklow, it's good to see him come back in top form. It was a pretty good layoff for him since the Breeders' Cup Turf, and he just did what he always does. He ran a 125 Timeform US speed figure. The good thing for me to see was Red Knight was kind of back in form, because it was hard to say what happened to him last time out. He really did no running whatsoever, but the old man got it back together here, and I'm sure we're going to see him in many more of these 1.5 mile races this year.
Yeah, these two opted for this easier spot rather than the Grade 1 Man of War, I believe last week, a race that Arklow certainly could have been competitive in as if his connections had decided to go there. But I would imagine there'll be Grade 1 races on Arklow's resume later in the year. He is that kind of horse. It's just when he gets into that top-level company, he's not always quite good enough to seal the deal and win those races. But against a field like this, he's always going to be tough. And he was pretty pumped up off the layoff for Florent Giroux. He basically dragged Ferrand into the lead coming around the far turn. Looked like maybe he was moving too soon, striking the front at the quarter pole, but he was just too good for these as he held them off in the stretch.
Yeah, I did want to talk about the trip. It was pretty impressive when you watch, because, I mean, he was wide all the way around that third turn, and it just didn't seem to matter. He was never in doubt coming home. So really good effort from him. And as we see with these older turf marathoners, they just seem to get better with age. So, he was a horse who didn't win a lot before, but he seems to have found out how to do it. He may not be a Grade 1 type, but I'm sure he's going to get some chances.
Skipping around a little as we conclude this podcast, let's move on to Belmont before we head out west. And Few races to talk about. One of those was a stakes race, the Grade 3 Soaring Softly for the 3-year-old fillies, going 7 furlongs on the turf. Not the fastest race in the world, kind of in line with that Hilltop at Pimlico, but a pretty competitive affair, one that seemed like it had a lot of horses with promise coming into it, and one of those did win the race as Bye Bye, who was just coming off a maiden victory at Gulfstream for Christophe Clement, was able to make the big jump up in class to get the job done here.
Yeah, it was a good effort from her. She got a 104 TimeformUS speed figure. Christophe Clement, he just seems to own these longer turf sprints at Belmont, the 6 furlong, 7 furlong sprints. He's always super dangerous in them, and he was again here. I guess the disappointment in the race had to be Toby's Heart, who went off a pretty heavy favorite off a win at Keeneland last time, but just seemed like she didn't really have that same kick going 7 furlongs, so these horses are going to have to get faster to be real players if they try to move up in class. So not sure what to make of it, but these 7 furlong races are always pretty unique at Belmont because we don't really see them anywhere else other than at Woodbine. But I enjoy them. I think they're good, and I wish more tracks could run them.
Yeah, I was happy to see this race draw such a competitive field because you can get a nice mix of horses both stretching out in distance and turning back when you run that 7 furlong distance. And Bye Bye was one of those stretch outs. And typically, I don't like horses coming out of those 5 furlong turf sprints at Gulfstream because I'm just not sure really what they mean when you get out to these longer turf sprints. But Bye Bye, if you look at the chart, even in the TimeformUS PPs of the race that she won her maiden at Gulfstream on March 21st, that's one of those races where everybody who finished behind her came back to either win or run significantly faster from a speed figure standpoint in their subsequent starts. And that was one of those races where she ran in the low 55s for a final time, which it's hard to make a whole lot of final times at Gulfstream, but she was just so visually impressive and had opened up a big gap on the rest of the field that day. And I mean, she showed that performance was no fluke in here. I thought Eric Cancel gave her a great ride. This was not a race that had a whole lot of pace signed on, and he was able to keep her in range of the leaders early and get the first run on some others who were coming from farther back, like that favorite Toby's Heart, who maybe was a little bit unlucky because she was kind of buried on the rail early and had too much to do with the quarter pole. But Toby's Heart just seemed like one of those 5.5 furlong specialists that might not have as potent of a late kick going the 7 furlongs.
Yeah, and you make a good point about Gulfstream. This race actually has the O code that we use for only. Speed figures on turf can be tough there because they just run so many different rail settings, so many different run-up settings that oftentimes you have to rate these races in isolation. And that was the case here. And when it's for 3-year-old maidens, as that one was, if you're going to do anything, you're probably going to underrate the race because you don't want to overdo it and you're trying to project off what the horses ran. And oftentimes these maidens will improve more than you expect. And that looks like the case here because, as you say, it's been a really productive race going forward.
Another turf race that I wanted to mention from Belmont Park on Saturday was the 5th race, an allowance race going a mile on the turf. And this one was won in very impressive fashion by the 4-year-old Dreams of Tomorrow, a horse that had began his career on dirt. Shug McGahee switched him over to the turf, had a little bit of success, but it seems like he's really taken a step forward now that he's getting a little older. And he ran well in a stakes last time at Pimlico, but this performance just took it to the next level.
Yeah, he's a horse who's been progressing all along. His speed figures keep getting better, and this one is his career best, a 116. It's kind of interesting. His last 2 races, he's kind of reversed his style. He was a horse who liked to be up on or near the lead, and now they've taken the blinkers off, and he's more or less dropped back into a closer, and it seems to have done the trick because he looks like a totally different horse. He's finished in this races stronger, and this wasn't a super weak field by any means. I mean, it was a solid allowance race, and he won by over 4 lengths, and had it been a mile and a 16th the way he was finishing, he might have won by 10.
Yeah, we don't have too many of these breeding dynasties left, like the Phippses, so it's always nice to see these horses that, you can trace back their lineage like you have with Dreams of Tomorrow. It's always nice to see them when they finally come around for Shug, who does take his time with these horses. Dreams of Tomorrow is from the family of daydreaming and imagining that Grade 1 turf horse for the Phippses from about a decade ago, so he definitely has the pedigree to be a nice stakes kind of horse. We'll see if he can continue on this upward trajectory. A couple other races that we should mention from Belmont Park are for the 2-year-olds, because we saw a couple of quick performances in maiden races this past week. One was from Thursday, as the Wesley Ward-trained Happy Soul, in her second career start, won off by double-digit margin. This daughter of Run Happy seems like she's pretty quick.
Yeah, it looks like we're getting some run happies who can run pop up all over the place, and she looks like another one. Got a 101 Timeform US speed figure. She had disappointed a bit in her debut in second, got an 84 that day, but she really exploded here, winning off by 11. This race was basically over about 5 strides out of the gate, so it was pretty obvious nobody was going to catch her. Just really good performance. Who knows where the Wesley Ward horses are going to show up next, so I'm not going to get too excited about her till I see her in the entries, but good effort from a 2-year-old.
Yeah, this one does not appear to have a lot of turf pedigree, if you were referencing his penchant for taking these horses over to Royal Ascot, but with Wesley Ward, that doesn't always seem to matter. He gets these horses to run on turf when he brings them over there, so we'll see who he ends up taking. This filly, though, definitely has a lot of speed, and as you say, I mean, you could look up the statistics as well. It's not just that we're seeing a concentration of them. The Run Happies, I mean, they're showing some ability to perform now. The 3-year-olds that we saw that were 2 last year, and also some 2-year-olds in this second crop. So he is turning out to be a pretty decent sire. Moving on to another 2-year-old maiden race from Sunday's card at Belmont. This one was won by a first-time starter, a well-meant one in Little Drama, who took all the money for Steve Asmussen. This one's owned by West Point Thoroughbreds. Pretty modest pedigree on this colt, but it looks like he's pretty quick.
Yeah, he certainly does. And let's not forget to mention he is an Oklahoma bred, something we don't see a lot of show
That's
up.
right.
So, yeah, it's I knew all about him. No, just kidding. I'd never heard his name before Sunday. It is a little hard to me. It was only a 3-horse field, so I do put a little bit of hesitance on getting too excited about it. But what is exciting is the speed figure he ran. He got a 107 Timeform US speed figure. He was just absolutely full of run at the end. It looked like he could have kept going forever. So who knows what's in behind him. Obviously, all the horses were first-time starters, but there were a couple other dirt races that compared really favorably with them, and I think the 107's legit.
Yeah, this is a really athletic horse. He's not a very big thing when you watch the replay. He's a pretty small, compact sprinter type, but he's got a really nice stride on him, a very efficient mover. And, being that Oklahoma bred, he's got kind of an obscure pedigree, being by that sire Dramedy, who I had kind of forgotten about him as a racehorse. He was a long-distance turf horse, actually. I think he earned his biggest victory going 1.5 miles on the turf. I guess he's best known as the sire of, I believe, Mighty Heart, who was that Queen's Plate winner on synthetic from last year. So even though this one's got the pedigree to go longer, he does look to me like more of a sprinter, but he's a very quick one. So I would imagine Steve Asmussen could have some fun with him this summer. Let's finish things up on this podcast by moving out west to talk about a couple of races from Santa Anita. One of those was a sprint for the 3-year-olds, the Grade 3 Laz Barrera, going 6.5 furlongs on the dirt. And this is one that, despite drawing a pretty small field, there was quite a bit of speed signed on, and it set it up for the one closer in the race, the Chosen Fran.
Yeah, and the betting was a bit surprising to me in here. I thought for sure Laurel River would be the favorite, as did the morning line maker. He was so impressive breaking his maiden for Bob Baffert, and I didn't watch this race live, and I was pretty surprised to see the result. But when I saw the figures, it kind of made sense. Laurel River basically ran the same race he did in his maiden race. He actually got a better figure than the winner for second, a 118. But the Chosen Fran was able to take advantage of him kind of running off and getting tired late, and just blew by him, and it was never in doubt after they passed that furlong marker. 114 for the winner, 118 for the runner-up. Nobody else really did any running after that quick early pace once Laurel River drew away from him. But a couple pretty quick sprinters here, so be curious to see where they show up next and what they can do.
Yeah, the Chosen Vron is now 3 for 4 in his career, just beaten by a couple of those Bob Baffert runners in the San Vicente in his second start, but since then he's been perfect. He's a pretty talented California bred, and as you said, that 114 that he got for this race, it's the best that he's done so far. He did get an absolutely perfect trip in doing it, and I mean, not only did he come from off the pace, but Umberto Rispoli even saved ground, making that move up the inside, coming around the far turn before swinging out for the stretch drive. So he really had a perfect storm of circumstances to run that top figure here, but he's clearly improving, so I wouldn't be surprised to see him tackle some tougher spots in the future. And as you said, Laurel River ran a huge race to be second. They were flying for that opening quarter mile, and he put away the other speed, who finished something like 25 lengths behind him. I mean, he was pretty game holding on for second here, well ahead of the rest of the runners, but he will have to find himself next time in a race that doesn't feature quite as much speed, because he's just got one way to go, and that is to the front as fast as he can go.
Yeah, the one thing I will say about the Chosen Vron, he did get a perfect trip, but he's also a horse who's now won wire to wire. He's won tracking from just a few lengths off the lead, and now he's won from the back of the pack, albeit just a 4-horse pack, but he was a good 6 lengths back. So he's pretty versatile. He could be a horse that turns out he can make his own trip.
Let's finish things up on this podcast by talking about one more race from Santa Anita on Saturday. That was the high-level optional claiming allowance race, the 5th race on that card, going 1.25 miles on the dirt, something that we rarely see allowance races, especially at this level, carded at. And Haywood's Beach, a horse who had actually spent most of his career on the turf, has recently switched over to the main track, and it seems like he's taken another step forward. And John Sadler might have a nice runner on his hands.
Yeah, when you sent the rundown for today and I saw Haywood's Beach, I had no idea who this horse was. And then, so I looked him up and looked at his past performances, and it's pretty obvious why I had no idea who this horse was. He hadn't done a whole lot of running. But since they switched him back to dirt, he's been pretty good. He got a 109 last time, which is basically what he had been running on turf. But he exploded here for John Sadler to a 118 speed figure from us, and looks like a horse who has found the surface that he wants. And that 118 in the older horse division, with any luck, could find himself a stakes winner, because it's not the strongest crop, and the 1.25 miles look like it's right up his alley. There's not a lot of spots to go in, but we do have that Santa Anita Gold Cup coming up. It's hard to say who else would show up. But I would say he's a contender based on this effort, and it almost looks like this race was written for him, for John Sadler, because the way he ran in it, really good effort, and I expect him in a stakes next time.
Yeah, this was really impressive. The early pace was honest enough, and it kind of fell apart, and he was not that far off at stalking about 2 lengths behind in third place, and once Tyler Bays asked him to go pretty early on the far turn, he quickly opened up an advantage on this field, and I mean, it looked like Bold Endeavor was going to offer him a challenge in upper stretch, but Haywood's Beach just never stopped running. Not only does he handle the dirt, but it seems like he's got a fair amount of stamina. I mean, and when I saw his pedigree, it was kind of no surprise. He's the son of Speightstown, who was just the most versatile sire out there, getting horses that can be top sprinters, as well as horses that can go as far as 1.25 miles, even on the dirt. And this looks like an exciting runner. I mean, he's got a really funny pedigree, actually, because even though he's by Speightstown, on the dam side, he's actually a half-brother to Stephanie's Kitten, that winner of over $4 million on the turf, Breeders' Cup Filly and Mare Turf winner. So that's where he gets the stamina from as well. But you can see why they ran him on turf so much, given that pedigree. But it seems like dirt is the right surface for him. So we'll see where he can go from here. But he's certainly with the right connections if they're going to tackle stakes company.
Yeah, that's what really caught my eye. We've seen John Sadler turn some of these older males into some really top performers. So it wouldn't surprise me if this horse has big things in his future.
Well, that's all the action on this week's TimeformUS Pacecast. The second jewel of the Triple Crown is now in the books. We're not going to have a Triple Crown winner this year. I think we knew that a long way out. But I kind of like these disjointed Triple Crown seasons where we have different winners of all the races, or at least different winners of the first two, because we do usually get a more competitive Belmont Stakes. So a lot to look forward to on that front in the upcoming few weeks. Obviously, we'll do a pretty comprehensive preview of the Belmont Stakes when we get there. But in the short term, we'll get back to business on Friday doing the TimeformUS forecast. Haven't looked really too much at the racing that's on tap for this weekend, but I'm sure Craig and I will find something interesting to talk about when we do that TimeformUS forecast this upcoming Friday. Remember that you can always listen to us on DRF.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Wherever you get your podcasts, just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Thanks for tuning in this week, and make sure to catch that TimeformUS forecast on Friday.